Yes, I can hear you clear. Can you hear me?
Yes. Let me turn the volume down. Hold on.
Okay.
You're yelling at me. How are you?
All right. Welcome, everyone, to MES Presents 9 on the Q, the show that discusses billiards and current events and how the two may intertwine. I'm your host, Tyreek A. Murphy, and today's special guest is CEO, or rather founder and president of H&H Rights Strategies, Dr. Nicole Fisher. Dr. Fisher, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. First thing first, before we start, how are you and your family holding up out here in these COVID streets?
We're okay. We're as good as anybody else. These are tough times, and actually my doctorate's in public health, so
Okay.
it's a wild time to be in public health and work all over the world, but live in the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us, Doctor, let's get on cue. When was your first experience into the world of pool?
I was probably like 8. My stepdad played, and he used to take me with him sometime when he got stuck babysitting. We would either go fishing or to a bar and play pool, which I'm not sure. You know, it was like the 80s and 90s. It was a whole different world. Kids and mothers playing pool. It was a different thing. So that was my introduction, and I'm not sure I ever got any better than I was then.
So I would say it's pretty safe to say that he introduced you, he influenced you into the sport.
He did. Thanks to him, I can fish and play pool.
So tell us, Doc, in today's spectrum, especially regarding, COVID and proper safety protocols, yourself as a senior health advisor, what do you think should be the U.S. health goal or mission?
At this point, where to begin? There's a lot of things that need to get done. If I could wave a magic wand, I think I'd start with, of all things, communication. I think here domestically, a lot of people's frustration, misinformation, it's all come from, we don't have a united front and a leadership that has come to us with a message, and they've not communicated well. And I'd further argue that, science is hard. Science isn't like other arenas like journalism. When someone publishes something that isn't true or it changes the next day, we're in this world of fake news. That's not exactly how it, in science, when recommendations change, it actually means we've learned something. We have more information than we did 2 weeks ago. And when we started with 0, or maybe even less than 0, because we were being given information from other countries that, wasn't meshing with what we were seeing, every small advancement, every change, every new recommendation, that to me is actually exactly what science should be. That's honesty. That's saying, hey, we learned something this week. We thought it was this. We realized it wasn't. And so I think if we had better communication with people, we could solve a lot of the problems that we're facing right now.
Right. So do you think that lack of communication, well, as a bonus question, do you think that lack of communication has led towards the numbers that we saw in fatalities?
Oh, certainly. We have people who, I started by talking about my family, right? I have relatives who have told me repeatedly, as a couple days ago, that this is a hoax, it's made up, it will disappear on election day. Completely invalidating the work I do for a living. But they're like, no offense to you, but this isn't real. And that to me, it's not a one-off person. There's mass emotions in the U.S. tied to whether this is real, whether it's not, whether there are power grabs. Right? people have lost faith. Build trust is to communicate with people and be honest with them.
Right. I mean, to your point, that's always the first thing that's said by someone who's going to insult you. No disrespect. And it always started that way.
Right.
Exactly. It's crazy. It's like that's supposed to ease the blow or something. It's supposed to make you.
Right. Like, you just feel like, I don't want you to take this too hard, but I'm going to insult you in some way.
Yeah, it's supposed to make you more receptive of the because there's a difference between constructive criticism and just straight, just being attacking. And I'm like, you say that, it's just crazy. So with widespread communities calling for systematic reform and budget reallocations across the nation, as a human rights and public advocate, and as a senior policy advisor on Capitol Hill, what do you think should be the government officials' essential priority?
Prevention. I mean, to me, the key is always prevention. Why spend $10 trying to fix the problem when you could spend $1 preventing the problem from happening? And that's probably why my gut reaction to your question about where I would start if I were to fix it, would be the way you talk to people. Because then that changes people's behavior. By the time they end up in the hospital, where people have to go on lockdown, they have to miss work, businesses have to close, right? All that is money that could be saved if, at the very beginning, no one got sick.
Right.
So, and we heard today, I read that, I don't know what state it was or what school, but a child tested positive and their parents sent them to school intentionally. And now there are 30 kids in quarantine. And to me, I'm like, that's proof that 1 ounce prevention is worth a pound of the repercussions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, even myself as a part-time administrator at, one of the hospitals that was hit the worst at Elmhurst, we have so many things coming at us at so many different angles that, definitely communication is key in order for us to stay on top of things. So I can definitely understand when you say, that prevention aspect is
What would be
key.
your top priority?
Me? I would go the same route that you would. You have to have that communication. It's key, regardless into what field you're working in. Whether it's the medical field, whether it's you're talking about environmental, or you're talking about maybe politics or whatever the case may be. You need that communication, because as long as you are all on the same page, everyone is on the same page about what's being depicted, you can get to that end goal. You can get to that result. But, again, a lot of things fall through the cracks. Some, unintentional, and then there is some aspects that it is intentional. But
Right.
The fact of the matter is when you see that communication, this is how you're able to, navigate.
Well, I think to your point, as you were talking, it made me think about that intention. And one of the best outcomes I've seen, there's one hospital here in the U.S. And one of the best outcomes I've seen, there's one hospital here in the U.S. And I think it came to leadership. I mean, all things come to good leaders. And what they did that impressed me, because we hear so much. I mean, there's so much wrong that we've done that I'm like a lot of people looking for good. And there's one hospital, and I won't name them, but from the very beginning, they started with calling their staff, including the janitors and everyone in the hospital, and just saying, we don't know. We don't know, but we're going to, and I just thought that's so honest. And then they took it a step further and said, whatever it is, we'll make sure you're taken care of. And anyone with parents at home, so taking care of elderly, they set up protocols for how to do that. Anyone with kids, they set up even hotel rooms. Like if you don't feel safe going home until we know more, we'll pay for a hotel room at the Holiday Inn down the street. And then they started doing a weekly, a Zoom with anyone who staff, faculty, doctor, whatever in the hospital. They started doing weekly Zooms with their kids.
Right.
Of just explaining your mom and dad, your whatever, here's what they do for a living, and because of that, and they got hit, and yet the morale I've seen, the coming together, like, it's been incredible, but it took good people who really started with saying, we don't know. That's honest, right? We're all in this together, but then we're going to take care of each other. And then that communication piece, even with the kids, saying your kids are scared, which is going to affect you and your ability to do your job well. And so we want to make sure that we're talking to your kids, letting them know we as a hospital are trying to take care of their parents as well. Like, and I was like, that's incredible. Like, that's good leadership right there.
And on top of that, it also puts a lot of people at ease because they know what's going on. I mean, even if you don't know, and you tell them that, even myself, there's times that I have staff that ask me, a question about something. And for the most part, I'll know the answer, or I may not know the answer. But in those cases where I don't know the answer, I let them know that I don't know. And then I get back to them with an answer, even if it's something that I myself can do, or it needs to be in the hands of somebody else who has a little more expertise than myself.
And that goes so far, because what ends up happening if you tell a lie and you pretend like you know, you're either going to have to backtrack it, or you're going to have to bullshit your way out of it. I mean, either way, you lose trust. And nobody works their best, nobody's their best self if you don't trust each other. So in a case like this, sometimes I don't know is the best thing you can say, because it's the truth. And none of us know. And anyone who says they knew in February or March or April, they weren't telling the truth, right? They were all winging it. So.
Absolutely. So do you think governmental systems and medical communities should adapt to a seat at the table concept to address universal health care concerns raised?
Oh, that's a really good question. So for those listening, a seat at the table is this concept. A friend and I used to, right now clearly we don't, we used to run this dinner series in which we would take a problem in a city, and we would invite 20 people to come to the table, to have a seat at the table, and we would give them, we joked, we called it the appetizer, and they'd get an email with some information, so they didn't come blind, right? At the same time, we did not tell them who else was invited, and that was tough, because it meant they just had to trust us, that they were going to show up and have a good time, and it was worth their energy and time. But the entire point would be 20 people who, at face value, maybe had nothing in common, but we knew they all touched a specific topic in a very different way. And so what that did is it got people to have conversations they normally wouldn't have. So, for example, at one point we had a guy who ran social media for one of the major agencies, and we had a pastor, we had a hospital CEO, we had a woman who ran a refugee center, and we were trying to solve a problem for a city. And there's no point at which, that pastor would have sat down with, say, the CDC's Twitter guy, right? But the point was, how do you communicate to her church? Through her. They trust her. They don't, doesn't matter what they're, so-and-so's tweeting. Not everybody's loving it, not everybody. So a seat at the table was really about bringing really different perspectives together to try and tackle a problem. I think that model would go a long way in solving the problems we have in global health. Particularly when looking at something like what we're dealing with now. I mean, we're learning new things every day, but no two populations, no two households are going to react the same way. And, so unless you have those voices present, unless everyone is represented, their fears, their concerns, their challenges, you're not actually going to solve the problem. So you can have 10 CEOs sit down, but they're not going to have, hi, sorry, my sister just arrived. She waved. I just saw a little thing pop up. Anyway, what 10 CEOs of different hospitals are going to walk away from isn't going to resonate with community clinics and churches in the same way. It's just not. So yeah, I think it's a great model. That's a fun question.
Yeah, you're definitely going to have to slide that into the next Capitol Hill meeting. Somehow, some way.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I know, right?
let's invite people who completely disagree with you and think about the world differently. You be quiet and listen to them. I'm sure they'll do really well.
I know, right? You might as well just pack a camper because you definitely will be there a while.
Yeah, right. They're like, sorry, meeting's over.
So with major sports and large events being, on restrictions, do you think this is the perfect time to educate society on the global health reform?
I do. In fact, I would say sport is a wonderful way to do that. I was a guest on a podcast the other day. I happen to host an event every year at the Super Bowl, focused on healthcare, but so it's really strange that I talk about sport a lot. But someone was like, it's by you wanting to take all these precautions, it could be viewed that you're very anti-sport. And I was like, the opposite, in fact. I'm extremely pro-sport. I think sport is, whether it's pool, whether it's football, whether it is the ultimate form of diplomacy. Kids don't even need to speak the same language to play together.
Right.
And the way we look to sport and to our heroes, whether it's learning teamwork, perseverance, commitment, I think sport is actually a wonderful place to talk about health, global health, public health. I can tell you, never in my wildest dreams did I think in the middle of a pandemic, I would be like, everyone should look to NASCAR as a model. But it was the first sport, at least here in the States, that was back. And to see drivers distant, to see no one in the state, and to see them all wearing masks, particularly to that audience, that actually blew my mind. I was like, watching NASCAR drivers walk wearing masks, socially distant support. I'm like, that's a better public health message than 90% of the tweets from whomever. And the same, even going back in, now that NFL and other things are happening, when you see people dispersed, when you see the precautions that are being taken, I think it constantly then, even if subconsciously, is reiterating and validating that these are the steps that we should be taking. And we're seeing them happen all over the world in literally every sport.
Absolutely. And it's even when you were talking about NASCAR, it's even transitioned over to Formula One. I just saw within the past couple of weeks with Anthony Lewis, wearing having the social distancing attire and talking about the current events as it pertains to injustices and so forth. So yeah, I definitely see what you're saying about that.
I mean, look at what just happened with the U.S. Open, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, had you told me 5 years ago we would be seeing those kinds of messages presented on, a young woman's mask every day, a different. That's, it resonates. It hits people in a very, different ways, depending on what they think. But it's the perfect medium to instigate conversation.
Right. So with the weak U.S. response to COVID and the rush to acquire medical, because we know it was weak. Let's be honest, we know it was weak. And the rush to acquire medical knowledge. Do you or HAR strategies think the U.S. could be at risk for medical terrorism?
When you say medical terrorism, what do you mean?
In regards to how all people, patients' information being, breached and submitted publicly to platforms and so on and so forth?
I think, I certainly think in addition to the coronavirus pandemic, we are fully in a pandemic of disinformation and misinformation that is exceptionally dangerous, very dangerous. What's happening now the playbook looks remarkably similar to things we see with anti-vaccination campaigns and lots of other things. I actually think as we move forward in time, I've heard people refer to this as a once in a century thing, because 1918 is what people keep referring to in at least the United States. There are outbreaks all over the world constantly. This is actually not new. And I'm getting to your question, but I think it's important for people to understand that, like, what's been happening in the Congo with Ebola has been going on for so long, and COVID overlays that. What's tuberculosis? There's still polio in the. These things have been going on. If you live in the States, we've had the luxury of not really paying attention to that, although we are starting to see them again. In fact, there have been a couple cases this year of polio and the plague.
Right.
How the fuck it's 2020 and the plague presents itself in the U.S. is just, that's just people who are not, they don't believe in things like vaccines. And so, to see these common threads all over the world, I actually think, and it's a very strong word, so I don't mean it in a fear-mongering way, but, bioterrorism to me is absolutely where the future is. The idea that someone, and this has nothing to do with coronavirus, the idea that someone could walk through O'Hare with a vial of something. They didn't even go through security and get on a plane. Just walk in and out and leave something. All of a sudden, it is literally spread all over the world. Germs, viruses, we can't see them. I think that's terrifying. Antimicrobial resistance, it's a mouthful, is something people should be very concerned about. We have overprescribed antibiotics to the point that things are starting to change and no longer respond to antibiotics. So what happens if every doctor writes a prescription for something that doesn't work? We're screwed, right? So
as individuals' bodies get so, accustomed to having, that same treatment regimen, and, you come across a strand that's just a little bit more resistant. So I
continues to grow. Yeah, so I think when you pose that question about medical terrorism, I think it's a really loaded question. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it it can mean a lot of different things. It can be intentional. It could be unintentional. And I think the other thing we really need to be concerned about is humans and animals interact more than we ever have. We encroach upon territory, and we're seeing things jump from animals to humans in new ways, and that's going to continue to happen. So the more we encroach on their territory, the more we eat them, the more, right? We're seeing things, swine flu, it isn't just, right? We talk about all these things. So I think this once in a century idea of a pandemic, I don't think we're there anymore. I think this is going to become not common. Common is too strong of a word, but I think it's not going to be once in a century. We're going to start seeing these more and more.
Right. And so coming back to what you said in regards to prevention, would you say, well, again, a bonus question, would you say that prevention is going to be one of your key components in your push when you're educating Capitol Hill or any organization to which you may deal with in regards to medical advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, and I say this for pretty much everyone around the world, but specifically in the United States, we have, I'll say failed. We have absolutely failed at our ability to think of basic things as healthcare, like food. Mm-hmm. I mean, 8%, the pre-pandemic, 8% of this country didn't know where all their meals in that week were going to come from. Right. And if you're homeless, if you don't have a place to shelter, how can you shelter in place? If you don't, right, if you don't have access to food, to clean water, these kinds of things, something like a pandemic and social distancing and wearing a mask and sheltering in place, those are completely secondary problems, right? And so here, I would argue, particularly in the U.S., we often forget that when we talk about prevention isn't just making sure that everyone has their full spectrum of vaccines, right? It's so many other things. It's actually making sure people have access to even get to a hospital. There are parts of Chicago where people have to take 3 buses to get to a hospital. That person's going to have a completely different that person's going to have a completely different outcome than someone who can drive and pay $75 for the parking garage at the hospital a few blocks away. So when it comes to preventing a lot of these things from happening, I think the key isn't just wash your hands. Even put coronavirus aside, wash your hands. That's the best thing you can do. Yes. Wash your hands all the time. But, those kinds of things matter. But if we're not addressing food, housing, things, transportation, education, things like that, then we're not actually doing real prevention.
And the crazy thing about that is, as we go through, any type of, crisis, it's like people forget the simplest things. Even in this instance, where as it pertains to the coronavirus, it has been preached so much to, wash your hands. And, people still amazingly will forget to wash their hands, or, they won't wash it as effectively like it's supposed to. I mean, I've had people, I've even witnessed them, sing the ABC song, and full length, just to make sure that they're washing their hands adequately. And it's just,
One of my happiest, this says a lot about me, it's kind of weird, but one of my happiest moments throughout the last, say, 6 months, so I've had to do a little bit of traveling, and to be in an airport when there are far less people than normal, but to see a line out of the men's restroom because I was like, they're washing their hands. They're taking the time. They're having to, I was like, something glorious has come out of this. Men are washing their hands.
And it's crazy because I see some fellas when they come into the restroom, generally our lines are non-existent because, exactly. we're in and out, we wash our hands. Well, at least some of us wash our hands. And, to hear that this new concept where we got long lines.
Yeah. And I felt absolutely, under the mask, I was like smiling, like ear to ear. They're washing their hands. That one act alone, we actually have seen in other countries that are currently in winter right now, that their flu levels are lower than normal. And it's suspected that it's because people are taking those precautions they should have been taking otherwise. Which is, if you don't feel good, stay away from other people. Stay home. Wash your hands. So it actually, if we can build up these habits, I actually think that will do a ton to normalize these kinds of things.
Right. So, coming back to your Billiards, do you think Billiards have the capability to return to sports channel broadcasting? And would you watch it?
Yes, and only if my fiance forced me to. Sorry.
So
Earlier, I was being honest, so I've got to be honest. He's a great player. He actually, before the pandemic, played in a league here in DC. So he played every week with a team, was competitive, and so the only time I really play now is when he needs to practice.
Right.
And he's just like shuffled him around the table for me. And I'm like, okay, here we go. But I think particularly one advantage that billiards has is, particularly with the table, like you're naturally apart, and you don't need, that competitive nature between people. That's there. You actually don't need the huge stadium. I think with, again, just the distancing, the precautions, everything sanitary, clean. People are doing what they need to do before arriving. I can't imagine that anyone that wants to play, especially someone who plays professionally and is on TV, would mind wearing a mask when they're at the table, right? If that's what it takes, then of course, people want sport to come back. They want to watch. I think as long as precautions are taken, we've seen whether it's the NBA bubble or NASCAR, it can be done. It can be done. Yeah.
So with that being said, who would you like to play a game against in pool? Celebrity, special iconic person to yourself? I mean, who?
Right.
That's right. I'm twisting the screws on you.
I'm going to give the really public health answer right here because I feel like it's my job at the moment. Dr. Fauci. Wow, is he a trooper? Agree with him or not? He's a trooper.
Right.
But I think if I were given a network and a couple hours to play competitively with someone, and I would just badger him with questions. I think he'd be a wonderful person right now because I think there are so many people that need to hear that voice. So I have to go with the public health answer.
Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. All right. So tell us, Dr. Fisher, is there anything that you're working on that we should be looking out for, that you want us to be looking out for, or any events or anything coming up?
Actually, yeah. I haven't really shared this publicly, so this is kind of my first public. I'm starting a podcast, which I'm terrified of, absolutely terrified. And I'm calling it the Global Good Podcast. And
nice.
It's really a result. I don't have this down to an elevator pitch because I'm literally it's 90% here, partially happening. We've got it planned, we've got it laid out, we've even got a website, we've got social media. I've outlined 30 episodes already. I have the unique ability. I've worked in more than 40, maybe 50 countries. And so I've had the opportunity to just meet incredible people who are doing remarkable work. I mean, there's one guy I'm interviewing, and I'm in love with this organization called Feed a Billion. And on any given day, now that there's, particularly with the pandemic, there's 1 billion people in the world who don't have access to food. And they're using girls' football or American soccer, but football fields in India to feed girls. And they've seen in some regions up to half, 5 out of 10 girls per school were being married off and have to leave school at very young ages in the places where they're providing meals and a family doesn't have to stress about food. It's gone down to 0, no trafficking. So I feel like the ability to do this, just what you're doing, but sit down for half an hour, and just talk about these crazy problems. Dikembe Mutombo is a future guest. He built a hospital system in the Congo named after his mother. And the work they're doing in the Congo and the capital of Kinshasa is remarkable. And when, people think of Dikembe as while he's
The block
studying.
master.
Right?
You know, the basketball block machine. Absolutely.
There you
But
go.
he's a very educated and business-minded individual.
He is. And his wife and the hospital system they've built, when you hear him talk about his mother and when his mother passed,
Right.
and building a hospital for his people in her name, you get to meet a whole different human. I mean, it's like literally like tears. I'm like, it's so and so, yeah, I want to start a podcast on call it Global Good. And each week or every couple of weeks, I haven't figured that part out yet, talk to people just doing the coolest shit all over the world. And then at the end, the entire purpose is to give resources of like, do you want to donate? Do you want to get involved? Do you want to watch their documentary? Here's all their partners. And the end goal for me is just, 1 + 1 can make 10.
Absolutely.
If the right people work together, right? Like, I mean, you and I, like, to have these kinds of conversations, like pool and public health, right? But between our two audiences, a whole bunch of people just
they just learn some things, and then some people are probably trying to figure out, well, who is this guy, and then who is this lady, you know? But this is why I say, the way they may intertwine.
Exactly. And so you'll have to come be a guest. Tell me, where you want to go. That's for me. It's really every couple of weeks. Let's pick a new place in the world.
Right.
It could be a city in the U.S. It could be the most remote part of the Amazon. Let's go. Let's learn something. And at the end of the day, I also think it's important for us to remember we're all the same.
Absolutely.
I really want ideas. If you have a good idea, send me your good idea.
Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank our guest, Dr. Nicole Fisher, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'll definitely reach out to you behind the scenes. We're going to talk.
Yes, sir.
All right. Take care.
Have a good night.